out!
The captain screamed, his voice torn apart by the roaring jet engines behind him. He shoved the boy's chest violently.
Are you out of your mind, you mute brat? Get out of the way before I crush you under these wheels!
The boy didn't step back. He couldn't speak. He was Elijah, 14, a congenitally mute child working as a trash sweeper at Charleston International Airport. Elijah didn't run away. He dropped to his knees, tightly hugging the front tire of a $100 million Gulfstream G700 jet. The aircraft was carrying a high-level diplomatic delegation and 3 of the world's top billionaires. 12 security guards and crew members stood around. Not a single person stepped forward. No one stopped the captain. They thought the mute boy was just a crazy vandal. But there was a terrifying truth they didn't know. Elijah was not hugging the frozen rubber of that wheel for money. He wasn't there to beg. He had his left ear pressed flat against the freezing, vibrating surface of the landing gear strut, using his physical body to connect with the machine. His extraordinary ears were capturing a sound that the aircraft's $5 million onboard artificial intelligence telemetry system was completely blind to. A hyper-frequency sound, as thin as a single strand of hair, was running along the internal core of the No. 3 titanium alloy high-pressure turbine shaft, deep inside the right engine housing. The jet was exactly 60 seconds away from taxiing to full takeoff thrust into the Category 4 storm. And if those wheels left the ground, the 14 elite lives on board would dissolve into an unsalvageable fireball over the dark waves of the Atlantic Ocean. Have you ever been completely refused a listening ear by the world, simply because you did not possess a powerful voice? Have you ever had men in expensive suits, backed by millions of dollars, dictate your absolute worth based entirely on the rags you wore or the broom you held in your hands? Do not look away from your screen, because the story of Elijah, the mute runway sweeper whom nobody noticed, and the devastating systemic exposure that occurred inside the Federal Aviation courtroom exactly 24 hours later will completely shatter the way you judge the silent people walking among us. To comprehend how a 14-year-old boy could detect a catastrophe that multi-million-dollar diagnostic completely missed, we must look backward into the shadows of his past. Elijah was born into an absolute world of silence. A rare congenital paralysis of his vocal cords meant he could never utter a single word from the moment he drew his first breath. Yet, nature possesses a magnificent, almost haunting way of balancing the scales of human capability. When the universe permanently seals one door, it opens another so wide it becomes a miracle. Elijah was born with an extreme medical condition known as hyperacusis, the presence of hyper-frequency auditory perception. While the average human ear stops processing sound frequencies past 20,000 hertz, Elijah's brain could effortlessly map acoustic waveforms all the way up to 45,000 hertz. He could hear the ultrasound calls of bats in the night air. He could hear the electrical hum of wires inside a concrete wall. And most importantly, he could hear the microscopic shifting of metal molecules. His father, Marcus Williams, was not an ordinary man. He was a retired Chief Master Sergeant and a decorated propulsion engineer for the United States Air Force. After serving 3 combat tours and leaving the military with a body broken by shrapnel, Marcus opened a modest, independent aviation mechanics shop to survive. Marcus never looked at his mute son with a single ounce of pity. Where others saw a disabled child who would be a burden to society, Marcus saw an elite gift waiting to be unwrapped. On the afternoon of Elijah's 8th birthday, Marcus led the boy to a heavy wooden workbench where a partially disassembled Rolls-Royce Merlin engine from a vintage World War II fighter plane sat. He started the engine, allowing the massive machinery to shake the entire room. Then Marcus took Elijah's small hand and pressed it directly onto the raw, vibrating steel of the manifold. Marcus pulled a worn, brown leather notebook from his pocket, the very notebook the father and son used to communicate, and wrote a single sentence in heavy black ink. "You cannot speak with your mouth, Elijah, but you have been given the rare ability to hear the hidden soul of iron and stone. Every machine in this world speaks a distinct language. Bad engineers try to listen with data screens. Good engineers listen with their logical brains. But the true legends of this craft, they listen with their hearts. Never trust the computer over what the steel is trying to tell you. For 5 beautiful, uninterrupted years, Marcus treated that dusty workshop as an elite academy for his son. He taught Elijah how to isolate the precise acoustic signature of an engine. By the time he was 12, Elijah could close his eyes and identify a piston head that was misaligned by a mere 0.02 millimeters just by listening to the intake sequence. He could hear the microscopic cavitation of hydraulic fluid when it became contaminated with single drops of moisture. To Elijah, an engine wasn't a collection of cold metal parts. It was a living, breathing creature that spoke to him in waves of frequency. But the peace of their lives was violently ripped away on a bitter winter night in 2024. A sudden, catastrophic electrical fire tore through their workshop. Instead of running for safety, Marcus Williams dove deep into the roaring inferno to retrieve his lifetime collection of engineering blueprints and research journals for his son. He managed to carry the heavy steel lockbox out to the street, throwing it into Elijah's arms, but his lungs were permanently scorched by the toxic chemical smoke. Marcus survived the initial fire, but his respiratory system was completely destroyed. With no health insurance and the workshop completely ashes, the family was plunged into systemic poverty. 6 months later, Marcus passed away in a crowded public hospital bed, leaving behind a devastated widow suffering from chronic illness and a silent son holding nothing but a box of blueprints and an unfulfilled legacy. Desperate to provide medicine and basic food for his bedridden, grieving mother, a 13-year-old Elijah walked into the luxurious corporate offices of Alpha Aviation Group, the billionaire conglomerate that controlled every square inch of the private hangar space and executive runways at Charleston International. But Bradley Vance did not seek a brilliant prodigy. He did not care about the credentials of the late Marcus Williams. He looked at Elijah's worn thrift store clothes and his complete inability to speak with absolute disgust. Handing back the application, he threw it onto a pile of trash on his desk. A mute? A disabled, voiceless black kid thinks he has the right to be a junior technical assistant on aircraft that cost more than your entire bloodline will earn in 10 lifetimes. Do you have any idea what a single titanium fastening nut on a private jet cost, kid? If your clumsy, invalid hands make a single scratch on a composite wing, you could work for us for 50 years and never pay it off. Bradley leaned back, pulling a heavy plastic clipboard from his wall, and tossed a cheap orange mesh vest across the table. The only position available for someone like you is runway debris clearing. You walk the tarmac, you pick up dropped screws, rusted nails, dead birds, and oil stains. $8 an hour, no medical benefits. No overtime. Take the vest and get the hell out of my office, or go starve on the street. The choice is yours. Elijah had no choice. He picked up the heavy orange vest. Pinned to the front was a cheap plastic identification card that read, Employee 409 Non-Vocal Service Staff. For an entire year, Elijah became an invisible ghost on the massive tarmac. He woke up every single morning at 4 a.m., walking miles in the freezing rain of winter and the suffocating, humid heat of South Carolina summers. His job was critical, though nobody acknowledged it. In aviation, a single loose metal staple or a small piece of stray rubber on a runway can be sucked into a jet engine during takeoff, causing what engineers call an FOD, foreign object debris catastrophe. Elijah treated his menial job with the sacred reverence of a master craftsman. He kept the runway immaculately clean, and every time a magnificent private jet belonging to an oil tycoon, a Hollywood star, or a foreign diplomat taxied past, Elijah would stand 50 feet away, close his eyes, incline his head, and analyze the magnificent symphony of their multi-million-dollar propulsion systems. But beneath the pristine luxury facade of Alpha Aviation Group, a deeply rotten financial scam was operating with total impunity. Bradley Vance, the operations director, had formed a corrupt alliance with the company's highest-paid pilot, the legendary untouchable Captain Julian Sterling. Julian Sterling was a man who possessed elite credentials on paper, but his private life was drowned in gambling debts and reckless luxury. To generate millions of dollars in illegal cash, Julian and Bradley had engineered a systematic maintenance fraud. Every time a private jet came into Hangar 4 for its mandatory 100-hour safety inspection, Bradley would draft highly detailed invoices claiming that critical internal components, such as primary shaft bearings, high-pressure fuel valves, and turbine blades, had been replaced with brand-new factory parts from Europe. The multi-billionaire owners were billed hundreds of thousands of dollars, which they paid without looking twice. But in reality, Julian and Bradley never replaced the parts. They left the old, fatigued, worn-out components inside the engines, cleared the digital safety logs using an illegal administrative override code, and split the stolen maintenance cash directly between themselves. They called it maximizing component lifecycle optimization. In reality, they were playing Russian roulette with human lives at 30,000 feet. The only human being on Earth who detected the rot was the 14-year-old boy who wasn't allowed to speak. 3 weeks prior to that fateful storm, a magnificent Gulfstream G700 arrived at the private terminal. It was the personal aircraft of Harrison Vance, the reclusive multi-billionaire global media tycoon, a man whose corporate power was so immense that governors and federal senators courted his favor. The G700 had just completed a mandatory engine overhaul under the supervision of Bradley Vance. The digital diagnostic screen in the hangar displayed a flawless 100% green safety rating. But as Elijah was sweeping the tarmac near the right engine intake while the ground crew did a routine test fire, his extraordinary hyperfrequency hearing picked up a terrifying anomaly. Deep inside the core of the Rolls-Royce Pearl engine, buried underneath the deafening roar of 30,000 pounds of thrust, Elijah heard a distinct liquid-like hissing at exactly 38,000 hertz. It wasn't the sound of healthy metal. It was the acoustic signature of microcavitation. The main titanium turbine shaft, due to an incredibly rare manufacturing metallurgy defect, had developed invisible microbubbles inside its solid core. Under the extreme heat of operational flight, these bubbles were expanding, creating microfractures that were slowly eating the shaft away from the inside out while the exterior looked completely immaculate. Elijah knew the danger. If that shaft fractured during flight, the entire turbine array would disintegrate instantaneously, cutting the aircraft in half. Using his late father's leather notebook, Elijah spent 3 consecutive nights micro-mapping the exact anatomical layout of the engine, tracing out the precise frequency waves, and writing down a desperate warning in plain English. 3 separate times he walked into the main office and placed those detailed technical reports directly on Bradley Vance's desk. But the arrogant director never even lowered his eyes to look at the pages. The first time, he used Elijah's warning sheet as a coaster for his greasy fast food bag. The second time, he crumpled it up and threw it at Elijah's chest. The third time, he tore the pages in half right in front of the boy's face. "If you bring me one more piece of your schizophrenic garbage drawings, you mute freak, I will fire you on the spot and make sure your sick mother is thrown out of her apartment by Monday morning. Who the hell do you think you are? You are a trash picker. You clean bird feces off asphalt." The Honeywell Central AI engine computer on that aircraft costs $5 million and says the engine is perfect. Do you think a disabled cripple who can't even talk knows more than the greatest software engineers in Silicon Valley? Get back to your broom! That very evening, Bradley Vance and Captain Julian Sterling sat in the executive lounge, laughing hysterically as they counted a fresh stack of $60,000 in cash from their latest fraudulent maintenance invoice. "Don't worry about the mute kid, Bradley. Tonight is the big flight." We are flying Mr. Harrison Vance and a prime European diplomatic delegation out to Geneva for the media merger conference. The charter fee alone is $300,000. If that silent little roach comes anywhere near my aircraft tonight, I'll have security break his fingers." They poured another glass of cognac, completely oblivious to the fact that the sky outside was turning an ominous, bruised shade of black. The storm of the century was arriving, and human flesh was about to face the terrifying judgment of steel. It was exactly 11:45 p.m. on the night of June 20th. The Category 4 hurricane had shifted its trajectory, slamming into the coastline of Charleston 3 hours ahead of all meteorological predictions. The visibility on the tarmac had disintegrated to less than 80 meters. The air traffic control tower was already preparing to suspend all airport operations. Inside the ultra-luxurious soundproofed VIP cabin of the G700, the ambient lighting was a soft, calming blue. Harrison Vance, the media titan, sat in a handmade leather club chair, reviewing a multi-billion-dollar merger document. Opposite him sat 2 European ambassadors, calmly swirling vintage champagne in crystal flutes, laughing softly, completely insulated from the violence of the storm outside. Up in the cockpit, Captain Julian Sterling adjusted his gold-trimmed headset. The digital primary flight display in front of him was flawless. Every single indicator gauge for the engines was perfectly resting in the green zone. Alpha 700, Charleston Tower. Wind is gusting at 45 knots, direction 290. Runway 29 right is cleared for immediate departure. This is the last departure before complete airfield shutdown. Good luck. Roger that, Tower. Alpha 700 is rolling. Let's show these billionaires what a real pilot can do. Julian reached out his right hand and smoothly pushed the dual thrust levers forward to notch 2, taxi and pre-flight power. The massive jet engines let out a deep, earth-shaking howl, and the $100 million aircraft began to slowly roll forward, its nose wheel tracking the yellow centerline of the runway. And at that exact microsecond, 50 yards away, standing completely unprotected in the blinding rain, Elijah Williams felt a wave of pure horror crash through his chest. The faint, rhythmic hissing of the past 3 weeks was completely gone. In its place, Elijah's hyper-frequency hearing captured a sound that made his stomach drop. It was a high-pitched metallic screeching at exactly 42,000 hertz. It was the sound of titanium screaming under extreme torsional stress. The micro-fractures inside the core of the number 3 turbine shaft had unified. The shaft was no longer solid. It was a fragmented web of metal held together by nothing more than raw friction. Elijah knew the physics with absolute certainty. The moment Captain Sterling reached the end of the runway and slammed the thrust levers to 100% takeoff power, the massive rotational force would instantly snap the fractured shaft. The multi-ton turbine fan, spinning at 15,000 rotations per minute, would break free from its housing like a circular saw blade, slicing clean through the passenger fuselage and severing the main tail fuel lines. The plane would explode on the tarmac, leaving 0 survivors. Elijah knew he couldn't scream. He had no radio to shout a warning to the pilots. The world had systemically stripped him of his speech, and right now, the only tool he possessed to save 14 human lives was his own fragile physical body. The young boy sprinted until he was positioned directly in the central path of the oncoming Gulfstream G700, which was now accelerating past 20 knots. The 2 blinding high-intensity halogen landing lights mounted on the nose of the jet flashed through the dark storm, illuminating Elijah's tiny silhouette. He stood there, completely exposed, his arms stretched out as wide as they could go, his face soaked with rain and tears, violently shaking his head in a desperate, silent plea for the machine to stop. Up on the flight deck, Julian Sterling's eyes went wide as a shadow suddenly appeared in his landing lights. He gasped, his survival instincts taking over, and slammed his feet completely down on the emergency toe brakes while pulling the thrust levers back to idle. The massive G700 aired violently. The heavy Michelin tires locked up, screeching against the wet asphalt, sending massive plumes of white water spraying 30 feet into the air. The giant metal nose of the jet skidded through the rain, slowing down inches at a time until it came to a complete, halting stop exactly 3 meters away from where Elijah stood. "What the hell is this? What is that little roach doing?" Julian slammed his headset onto the seat, turned on the internal radio, and roared into the microphone. "Security! Security! Get out to runway 29 right immediately. That psycho mute trash picker is standing in front of my nose gear. Drag him off and lock him in a cage before I get out of this cockpit and kill him myself." Within 30 seconds, the blinding red and blue strobe lights of 2 heavy airport security pickup trucks sliced through the storm. 6 burly, uniformed security guards leaped from the vehicles, brandishing heavy tactical batons. Bradley Vance, holding a large black umbrella over his expensive suit, hurried out behind them, his face twisted in absolute fury. A guard rushed forward, grabbed Elijah by his hair, and brutally slammed him face down onto the freezing, flooded asphalt. Another guard pinned his heavy boot directly between Elijah's shoulder blades, forcing the boy's face into a puddle of fuel-contaminated water. "You invalid piece of garbage! You want to die tonight?" "Do you have any idea whose flight you just sabotaged? This is a federal offense. You're going to prison for the rest of your pathetic life." Captain Julian Sterling opened the main hydraulic air stairs of the G700 and marched down into the rain, his leather boots clicking sharply against the metal steps. He walked straight over to where Elijah was pinned, saw the old, wet leather notebook sticking out of the boy's vest pocket, and violently ripped it out. He looked at the hand-drawn blueprints covered in water stains. "Look at this, Bradley. The freak is still playing engineer. He thinks my engine is going to explode. He expects us to delay a $300,000 flight because his defective ears heard a ghost." With a cruel smirk, Julian threw the notebook straight down into a deep, oil-slicked puddle, stepping on it with his heavy boot, grinding the delicate technical ink of Marcus Williams into the mud. At that moment, the door of the hangar nearby opened, and an old, weathered African-American janitor named Walter Brown stepped out into the rain. Walter had worked at this airfield for 30 years. He was the only man who had been a loyal friend to Elijah's father. Walter dropped his mop, ran across the active tarmac, and threw his own body over Elijah to shield him from the guard's boots. He looked up at the open door of the jet where billionaire Harrison Vance had just stepped out onto the top stair, wrapped in a black cashmere coat, looking down at the chaos with extreme impatience. "Mr. Harrison Vance, please, sir, look down here." "I know this boy. He is the son of Marcus Williams, the greatest chief propulsion sergeant this country ever had. This child is not crazy. He has a gift from God. He can hear what your computers cannot see. Please, sir, I beg you, trust the boy just once. Do not let them take him. Shut that old janitor up. Drag both of these roaches off my runway and throw them into the security basement. Captain Sterling, get back to the cockpit and get this plane in the air. We are already 20 minutes behind schedule." The security guards brutally began to drag Elijah and Walter across the gravel. Elijah's knees scraped against the rough stone, leaving lines of deep red blood in the water. He turned his head back, watching the right engine of the G700 begin to whine again as Julian Sterling climbed back into the cockpit. A high-pitched screeching had reached 45,000 hertz. The steel was weeping, its silent scream filling the night sky. And as the guards threw him into the back of a dark security van, Elijah closed his eyes, a single hot tear sliding down his mud-covered cheek. He had done everything he could. The rest was left to the judgment of the heavens. 9 a.m. the following morning. An emergency tribunal of the Federal Aviation Administration Oversight Division was convened. Bradley Vance had used his immense corporate connections to fast-track the hearing. They didn't just want Elijah fired. They wanted to transform a 14-year-old mute orphan into a terrifying public example to protect their million-dollar maintenance empire. Bradley Vance stepped up to the mahogany witness podium, adjusting the microphone with a practiced, confident smile. His voice boomed through the courtroom speakers. Your Honors, what we witnessed last night was a clear, calculated act of domestic aviation industrial sabotage. The defendant, Elijah Williams, used his physical body to block a transnational corporate aircraft on an active low-visibility runway. The economic damages resulting from flight cancellation, diplomatic delays, and reputational harm to Alpha Airlines total exactly $2.4 million. Furthermore, he caused immense psychological distress to our elite clients. We demand the absolute maximum statutory penalty, 5 years in a federal juvenile detention facility, and the total asset seizure of the defendant's estate to mitigate our corporate losses. The lead corporate attorney stood up, smoothing his tie, and presented a massive digital document on the courtroom's central projection screen. To support Mr. Vance's testimony, we here submit the certified telemetry and black box data logs from the Gulfstream G700 captured at 11:45 p.m. last night. As your honors can see, every single diagnostics metric, from turbine exhaust gas temperature to vibration telemetry, displays a flawless 100% green rating. In the elite realm of modern aviation, we trust cold, hard scientific data and the certified credentials of Ivy League-trained captains. We do not alter multi-million-dollar schedules based on the alleged intuition of a low-income trash picker who doesn't even possess the biological capability to speak. The 3 administrative judges sitting on the high bench nodded slowly, taking notes. In the gallery, a dozen corporate journalists began typing furiously on their laptops, ready to publish front-page articles about a delusional mute boy who ruined his family's future for a viral stunt. Elijah's mother reached out her trembling hand, clutching her son's arm, her voice breaking into a soft, desperate whisper that carried through the silent room. My boy is not a saboteur. He didn't want to hurt anyone. He was only trying to save them. Please, please look into his eyes. He doesn't lie. With all due respect, madam, tears are not acceptable evidence in a federal aviation tribunal. The data is absolute. Your son has 0 technical certifications, 0 degrees, and 0 proof. He is guilty. The room fell into an oppressive, suffocating silence. Julian Sterling leaned over his table, caught Elijah's eye, and mouthed 3 words with a vicious sneer. You are finished. Suddenly, the heavy double mahogany doors at the back of the courtroom exploded open. The sound echoed like a gunshot through the room. Every head turned. Walking through the doorway with an immense, unyielding aura of absolute power was Harrison Vance, the global media multi-billionaire. But he was not walking alone. Walking directly beside him was a striking, severe-looking woman in her late 50s, with silver-streaked hair pulled tight into a professional bun, wearing the heavy, authoritative black robes of a federal Supreme Court judge, Judge Evelyn Thorne, the supreme head of the National Transportation Legal Oversight Bureau. The entire courtroom immediately rose to their feet in sheer shock. Bradley Vance's confident smirk froze on his face. His skin turned from a healthy red to a pale, sickly gray in the span of a single heartbeat. He rushed forward, his voice suddenly shifting into a high-pitched, sycophantic whine. Mr. Harrison Vance, Your Honor, what an unexpected honor. Have you come to personally witness this criminal child receive his judgment? Harrison Vance stopped. He didn't look at Bradley. He didn't acknowledge his existence. He walked straight past the corporate defense table, approached the humble wooden desk where Elijah sat, and placed a heavy, dented black aluminum lockbox directly in front of the boy. It was the survival box of Marcus Williams. Judge Evelyn Thorne climbed the steps to the central judicial bench, she taking the center seat. She didn't sit down, she stood over the room, and slammed her heavy wooden gavel down with such immense force that the sound made the microphone clip with static. Let this tribunal come to immediate order. This court officially declares. The plaintiff status of Alpha Aviation Group is permanently revoked. This proceeding is now officially converted into an emergency federal criminal grand jury investigation regarding systematic maintenance fraud, corporate racketeering, and 14 counts of attempted corporate manslaughter against the individuals Bradley Vance and Julian Sterling. A collective gasp exploded through the gallery. The journalists stopped typing, their mouths hanging wide open. Julian Sterling's dropped to his sides, his face completely draining of color. "Judge Thorne, Your Honor, there has been a catastrophic misinterpretation of facts here. We are the victims. The aircraft was pristine. The AI computer data proved it. Silence!" Judge Thorne slammed her hand onto a digital interface on her desk. "The computer data you submitted to this court is a fraudulent fabrication. At 4 a.m. this morning, under an emergency executive federal warrant signed by my office and backed by Mr. Harrison Vance, a special team of elite propulsion engineers from the United States Air Force Materiel Command conducted a complete physical teardown of the No. 3 Rolls-Royce engine of the G700. Project the forensic video feed immediately." The central screen flashed. The green data charts disappeared. In their place appeared a high-definition, crystal-clear forensic video feed from a secure military hangar. Running directly through the solid center of the metal shaft is a massive, jagged, blackened structural crack measuring exactly 2.1 inches in length. The crack had expanded so severely that it had eaten through exactly 90% of the internal load-bearing structural integrity of the shaft. It was a structural corpse held together by a thread of friction. Harrison Vance stepped up to the witness box. He did not look like a proud billionaire. He looked like a man who had stared directly into the eyes of death and had barely survived. Last night, after these two monsters had this child thrown to the ground, I went back to my cabin. But as I sat there, I looked out the window and saw a battered, wet leather notebook floating in a muddy puddle on the tarmac. I ordered my personal security to go down and retrieve it. I opened the wet pages, and there, written in the steady hand of a 14-year-old child who cannot speak, I read a complete, flawless engineering diagnostic of my own airplane. The young boy wrote, "Axis number 3, frequency 42,000 hertz, core crack 2.1 inches, will break completely after 10 seconds of reaching takeoff thrust." I looked at my engine, and for the first time I isolated a terrifying, violent micro-vibration that matched his notes. I immediately overrode Captain Sterling, aborted the flight, and contacted Judge Thorne. The Air Force engineers told me this morning. They told me that if that aircraft had traveled just 100 more meters down that runway and reached full takeoff power, the shaft would have shattered. My plane would have disintegrated on the ground. My daughter, my guests, my crew, and myself would have been burned alive. And do you want to know why the $5 million AI computer didn't see it? Because these two corrupt parasites had installed an illegal administrative jailbreak patch into the aircraft's Honeywell telemetry software. They deliberately muted the internal vibration sensors so the computer would display 100% green, allowing them to pocket exactly $1.2 million from my personal maintenance fund for parts they never purchased. They lined their pockets with gold, and they were willing to let 14 people die to cover their tracks. Bradley Vance's knees give out completely. He collapses heavily onto the courtroom floor, weeping hysterically, his expensive gold-rimmed glasses sliding off his face and shattering against the marble. Captain Julian Sterling stumbles backward, his back hitting the wall, his hands shaking so violently he cannot even lift them. Two federal marshals step forward, their heavy boots echoing on the marble, and slap heavy steel handcuffs onto the wrists of the disgraced captain and the operations director. Julian Sterling, Bradley Vance. You stood in this facility and used your elite corporate credentials, your wealth and your societal status to humiliate and destroy a child because he did not have a voice to fight back. You called him trash with no right to speak. But it is your sickening greed and your elitist arrogance that has exposed you as cold-blooded attempted mass murderers. This court orders the immediate permanent revocation of all commercial aviation licenses for Julian Sterling. We order the total asset freeze of Alpha Aviation Group's Eastern Division. You are remanded into federal custody without bail. The statutory minimum for your crimes will be no less than 15 years in a maximum security federal penitentiary. The gallery erupts into shouts as the marshals brutally drag the screaming Bradley Vance and the silent, broken Julian Sterling out of the courtroom. The journalists sprint out of the double doors to wire the biggest corporate crime story of the decade. The room grows quiet once more. Judge Evelyn Thorne steps down from her high judicial bench. She walks past the lawyers, past the tables, and stops directly in front of Elijah Williams. The federal judge looks down at the 14-year-old boy in his mud-stained safety vest, and she does something that has never been recorded in the history of that courtroom. She pulls her shoulders back and delivers a crisp, solemn, military-grade salute to the mute boy. Elijah Williams, your father, Chief Master Sergeant Marcus Williams, was a dear comrade of mine during our service in the Air Force. He was a visionary engineer who loved this country. And today, child, you have proven to the world that you did not just inherit his extraordinary ears, you inherited his unbreakable, heroic heart. On behalf of the Federal Aviation Administration, the United States government, and the 14 human souls alive today because of your courage, I salute you. Your voice has been heard. The ultimate, most magnificent revenge you can achieve in this life is not to strike back at your enemies with anger. The ultimate revenge is to live a life so profoundly brilliant that you stand in a position of global authority that those who once tried to crush you can never dream of reaching. 1 month after that historical tribunal, billionaire Harrison Vance completely dismantled the old management of the airfield and invested $25 million to establish the Williams Diagnostic Center. The old loyal janitor, Walter Brown, was promoted to chief safety inspector of the entire airfield, given a massive corporate salary and an elite pension tract to honor his loyalty. Elijah's mother was moved into a state-of-the-art medical estate, her health care fully funded for life by the Vance Foundation. For the first time in 2 years, the color had returned to her cheeks, and she sat in the VIP balcony of the hangar, watching her son with a smile of pure, tearful pride. Elijah was no longer a ghost picking up trash in the freezing rain. He was now the ultimate technical authority of the entire Southeastern aviation network. Every single multi-million-dollar private jet belonging to the world's elite was legally required to pass through Hangar 7 for a procedure that pilots worldwide now call Elijah's listening protocol. Before any aircraft is cleared to leave the ground, the massive hangar goes completely silent. The high-tech diagnostic computers are turned off. Elijah Williams steps forward alone. He places his bare palms flat against the cold metal casing of the running jet engine. He closes his eyes, tilts his head, and allows his extraordinary hyper-frequency hearing to scan the shifting molecules of the steel. If Elijah opens his eyes and raises his right thumb, that aircraft is declared the safest machine in the sky. If he shakes his head, not a single pilot on Earth will dare to touch the thrust levers. He has become the voice of the sky, the ultimate guardian of human life. Mounted on the central wall of the hangar, beneath a beautiful bronze bust of Marcus Williams, is a framed quotation written in heavy black ink. Every machine speaks its own language. The arrogant try to listen with data screens, but the true legends, they listen with their hearts. This motion picture was never truly about high-performance jet engines or multi-millionaire lifestyles. This was a story about the hidden Elijahs who walk beside us every single day of our lives. It is about the silent janitor sweeping the floor of your corporate office. It is about the exhausted waiter refilling your water glass at a restaurant. It is about the poor child sitting alone in the corner of a public library whom you walk past without a single glance. Our modern world has become terrifyingly loud. We have become an audience that is completely obsessed with expensive suits, high-status titles, and the cold data of digital screens. We have forgotten that true human brilliance, absolute integrity, and the wisdom of the soul do not require a loud voice to exist. Sometimes the most magnificent miracles are wrapped in absolute humble silence. Bradley Vance and Julian Sterling believed their corporate titles and their expert credentials gave them the right to treat a human life like garbage, and they found their destiny behind the cold steel bars of a federal penitentiary. A 14-year-old boy who couldn't utter a sound saved 14 lives because he possessed the deep humility required to truly listen. Be completely honest with yourself as you sit before your screen tonight and let this question truly weigh upon your conscience. If last night Elijah had approached you under that freezing storm, wearing ragged clothes and making desperate, silent hand gestures under the wheels of your machine, would you have handed him a broom to push him away? Would you have laughed and thrown money at his face to clear your schedule, or would you have had the grace, the wisdom, and the humility to stop and choose to listen? If the story of Elijah has pierced through the noise of your life tonight, please type "Justice for Elijah" in the comments section below so we can unite our voices for those who cannot speak. Share this film immediately with someone in your life who is currently feeling invisible, someone who has been written off by society, to remind them that their ultimate worth is dictated by the courage they carry in their heart, never by the judgment of an arrogant world. Do not forget to hit the subscribe button for Karma Storytime right now, because every single week we bring you cinematic journeys of human dignity, unmatched karma, and the profound triumphs of the underdogs of this world. And we tell these stories for people exactly like you. Thank you for choosing to listen. Remember, every single soul you walk past is carrying a magnificent universe inside. Be humble enough to hear it. We will see you in the next story.